Hi everyone. So this week you are going to be submitting a rough draft of your Project 1 assignment. This is assignment 1-5, and for this rough draft you'll be completing the information for the first two ads. So this is your assignment as it appears in Brightspace. So to begin, you are going to need to download the Project 1 comparison template Word document because this is what you'll be filling out. It's also important that you take a look at the comparison template exemplar and that you take a look at the guidelines and rubric as well. So let's start by taking a look at this template. So this is what the template looks like. You will notice that the first row here is where you're going to be identifying your advertisements. The next row is for questions about individuals from the ad. Then you have questions about groups, and then you get a section asking about questions regarding culture. So in item 4, you need to compare and contrast the ads. And then in item 5, you'll be giving statements of overall observations that a social scientist might make, as well as asking questions about human interactions. So a quick reminder for the rough draft, you only need to worry about your first two ads. You can go ahead and fill in your ad information for all 4, but you only need to submit your first two ads in week 1. All right, so we are going to go through this row by row and talk about what's needed. So first, we'll talk about that top row where you insert your advertisements. You'll put your ad titles into that row. Now, where do you get these ads? These are the 4 ads that you chose in your 1-4 assignment. If it's an ad that you chose on your own, please provide the hyperlink for that. Otherwise, you can just put the title of the ad in that cell. So this is how it appears in the template. I took my ads that I selected, and you'll notice I entered in for ads 1 and 2. Because this was not an ad from the choices provided by the school, I put a hyperlink in so that it's easy to access that ad. Okay, so next, you move on to the body of the template. So in this first section, you are going to be asking questions about the individual. So as we've talked about, questions about the individual are questions from psychology. Questions connected to psychology may ask about the inner person. They might ask about someone's motivation or emotions or perceptions or perhaps about their well-being. And these questions are also about a single person. So it could be the man, the woman, the child. You're looking at one person and you're looking at these aspects of that one person. So I have here an example of an ad. So if we were going to use the Infusium ad, an example of a question that I could ask is, why is the woman at the desk looking at the other woman so longingly? So I'm asking about possible feelings of an individual in the ad because she appears to be looking at her and saying something like, oh, I wish I could look like that. She has that longing look. And so that would be a question about an individual. So as we move on to the next row, you're going to be asking questions about groups. And these are questions rooted in psychology. So questions related to sociology may ask about group membership. It might ask about how they're being used by people to define themselves or others. And the questions may be about how society operates or changes over time. So you could ask about more than one person and a trait about that group of people. So even if you only have one person in an ad, it is possible to ask questions about groups because that one person represents a group of people. So using that same Infusium ad, we could ask about women, people who work in an office together, society in general. There's a lot of options. An example of a question we could ask would be, do women feel great confidence when their hair looks good? Because she's just walking through, she's not worried about, she didn't check on her dress to make sure there was no issue with her dress as she walked out of the bathroom. So it's a question about confidence. And again, even if there is only one person in the ad, you can still ask a question about whatever group that person is representing. Okay, so then we're going to move on to questions about culture. Remember, questions about culture are questions from anthropology. Anthropologists ask questions about components of cultural change. They compare and contrast cultures, and they aim at tracing the development of different cultures over time and try to understand how and why these cultures have changed. So remember, when we're asking about cultures, we need to be specific about what cultures we're talking about. So again, the same ad, we're going to take a look at the different cultures we see here. So we can feel comfortable with the assumption this is an American ad, and therefore people in the ad are American and supposed to represent American culture. We can also go beyond nationality and think about the culture of people who want beautiful hair. We can also think about the culture of people who work in an office building. As they share the same common goal and common practices, they're a culture. And depending on how we ask the question, sometimes groups are also cultures. Men, women, and children can be considered cultures because they each have a certain set of expectations, goals, and commonality that is shared specifically among the members of that group. So, as you ask this question, remember that you need to identify a culture. So, a question about culture that we could ask may be, would men be viewed the same way if they walked out of the bathroom like this? We're comparing the culture of women to the culture of men and how that culture is viewed by society. So now that we've talked about the kind of questions we can ask, let's shift gears a little and talk about what not to ask and why these questions are not appropriate for this assignment. So all of these are actual questions or submissions that I've gotten over the years. So the first one, why did they write their slogan in green? Well, regardless of which section you put this into, it's not a question about an individual, it's not a question about a group, and it's not a question about a culture. It's asking about a slogan and a color. So therefore, it is not an appropriate question. Does this wrinkle cream work? Well, again, it's not a question about an individual, a group, or a culture. It's asking about the product. Why is she blonde? Well, this is actually a question about biology. We'd be asking about what's in the woman's DNA that made her blonde, as opposed to her having a different hair color, like being a brunette or a redhead. And while this is a science question, it's not a social science question. What do other cultures think of this ad? Well, there's actually two issues with this question. The first is that no specific cultures have been identified. What other cultures? What culture do you think this ad is about? What culture are you asking this question regarding? And then, of course, the second issue with this is that it's asking about the ad instead of asking about a culture. So the next question actually has similar issues. Can you buy insert product here in another culture? Well, remember, culture goes beyond a location where someone lives. People all across our country have different cultures. People who live in the same state or in the same town have different cultures. So the second issue with this question is that it's asking about the product and not asking about a culture. So the last one, this ad is full of stereotypes. Well, this one is actually a very simple reason why it's not acceptable. This is a statement and not a question. Remember, for these first three rows, you need to be asking questions. So moving on to the fourth part of the assignment, you are asked to compare and contrast the ads. When we compare, we look at similarities, and when we contrast, we look at differences. You can do both of these in this section. Look beyond the products being sold. Look beyond she's wearing a blue dress and the other girl is wearing a red dress. What about the messages of the ads? Is one stereotypical and one the opposite? What about the behaviors? Does one show a person with compassion and another one show a person who's angry and violent? Look deeper than the colors used, the slogans, or the products. Take a look at some of these social science topics. And remember, you need to provide two distinct comparisons. Compare two separate things in this section of your assignment. And be sure that you're stating what you see in the ads that's leading you to these statements. So in this final section, there are two parts. The first part asks you to make statements about the overall observations a social scientist would be interested in studying. The second part is asking for you to provide larger questions about human interactions. So think about all those things we talked about being the focus for psychologists, sociologists, and anthropologists. And what things did you see in the ads that would spark their interest, that would they would want to study further? You're just writing sentences in this first section. You'll just write your sentences. And then in the second section, you're going to look at the human interactions that you saw. What questions would someone in the social sciences have about these human interactions? So, next week in week 2, you will be taking the feedback that you get from your rough draft and using that to make changes to the information that you provided for your first 2 ads, to then create information for your final 2 ads, and to make modifications for these first 2 ads. Your final draft is due in week 2, and we'll need to have all 4 of your advertisements. This is really a great opportunity for you to practice reviewing feedback and incorporating that feedback into your assignments. Remember, if you have any questions, you can post them in the general questions discussion board or send me an email. Thanks for watching.